Hello, lovelies. Welcome to Horror 421, the podcast, with your hosts, special effects makeup artist supreme, Elena Morales, and your friendly small-town horror author, Charles Campbell. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the frights in this week's episode.
This episode of Horror 421, the podcast, is brought to you by Terror Tour. Music is a killer. Virginia Morgan is the lead singer of a band called the Valley Rats. They have embarked on a regional tour. There is excitement in the air, but there's also something else. One by one, members of the band receive ominous letters at each stop. At first, they think it is a harmless prank staged by a fan. Soon, they learn it is something much more sinister. The band will have to come together to play the show of their lives if there is any hope that they can survive. The Terror Tour. Terror Tour can be found at valleyboypublications.com by clicking on the Shop tab. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Horror 421, the podcast. I'm your host, small-town horror author Charles Campbell. And with me today, I have a special co-host. He's a good friend of mine. He's a movie director, a producer. He produces television series. He does a lot of things. And his name is Henrique Couto. Say hello to the audience, Henrique.
Hey, my friends. How are you? How are you guys doing today?
We're doing awesome. I know the audience is. And today we have a guy that I've wanted to get on the show last year, but because of my circumstances, I couldn't get him on. It wasn't on his end. It was on my end. But he is a fellow author. His name is Jeff Strand. And, I went through his library a few minutes ago, and the best way I can describe it is he's written a shit ton of books. So that's what I told him. So, Jeff, we're really excited to have you on the show today.
Yep, glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, I want to kick it off with this. I did notice something, and it kind of caught my attention. I thought of Susan Lucci in the daytime soaps, and she would always not win the, an Emmy Award? Is that what she was always up for, a daytime Emmy? And I'd noticed that you had submitted on 4 occasions titles to the Bram Stoker Award. And you were the Susan Lucci of the Bram Stoker Award until you finally got an award, and it was with what was the name of the book? 20th anniversary screening.
Right.
So congratulations. I wanted to start off by saying that.
That broke my streak. I was not actually, wasn't in the lead. The winner so far is Scott Edelman, who has 8 nominations without a win. So he created little punch cards. Anyone who has been nominated for Stoker without winning gets a little punch card, but then I had to write void in mine after I
Nice. Well, like I said, you have a humongous library of books, and I've had the privilege of reading 3 of them. I say reading, I actually read 1 and I listened to 2. And your narrators are awesome, by the way, that you get for Audible. So I listened to Pressure and I listened to Deathless. And I will get into those a little more during the podcast, but I love both of those books. And when I listened to Pressure, to me, it was written as a standalone story. It seemed like you had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and didn't know how you're going to, pump up a sequel for that. So I was interested in seeing how you brought that back. So I guess a good question to start with is, with that, I've done 1 sequel in my writing career so far, and it turned into a trilogy of books, and it was an unintended trilogy. How do you get your mindset to go back into that world? And I'll give them a brief overview of what Pressure and Deathless is about in just a bit, but I just kind of want to get your take on how you can go back to something once you've finished a story.
Well, Pressure and Deathless are the only ones I've done that weren't intended to be a series. The Wolf Hunt books is, while I was writing the Wolf Hunt books, I'm like, I like these guys. I need to do more. So I did Wolf Hunt 2, Wolf Hunt 3, and then the Andrew Mayhem series, which was 5 books, was always intended to be a series. With Pressure was indeed just meant to be a standalone book. But, everyone doesn't die at the end. There was room for the story to continue. And Pressure takes place over about 20 years. So it kind of made sense to hold off for a while. And then I started thinking, it's been about 15 years since Pressure came out. Maybe this is a good time to revisit it and follow the same format, which Pressure is done in 4 segments, each one covering a fairly large gap of time between. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to do the same thing, just follow that same character through 4 more major segments of his life. So it felt like the right time. And I thought, maybe, Pressure has continued to be popular since it came out. So this is a good time to revisit that one. But it wasn't ever the intention. The intention was Pressure's the end, but it was not a definitive no more can possibly happen ending. It was a reasonably open-ended ending. So I thought, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, and Pressure was amazing. I loved it because it started, basically during a young man's life. His name was Alex, if I remember correctly. And it started with him being pressured into doing something that he really didn't want to do. So I won't give any spoilers here, but it's kind of something that followed him through the rest of his life, really. And he was pressured to do something, and it gave his parents an excuse to send him away for all intents and purposes. And during that time he was sent away, he met this character that kind of haunts him throughout his adulthood. And that's pretty much all I'll say about it, because I really don't want to give the story away. It's a great story, and definitely Jeff should be proud of it. It had me engrossed, and your narrator on that he was pretty sweet. So
yeah, Scott Thomas, he's also narrated the Wolf Hunt trilogy and my book Ferocious. So
okay, awesome. Well, speaking of narrators, we got a pretty good narrator here. His name is Henrique Couto, and he narrates a series called Weekly Spooky every week. So he does a bunch of short stories. And I don't want to hog the spotlight here asking you questions. I want to see if Henrique wants to jump in, if he has any questions for you, or if he wants to discuss anything. But I have a list here to go by.
My obsessions are always nuts and bolts related. So my question would be, and I apologize, I don't know, I'm not nearly as familiar as Charles is with you, but that's mainly because I am a very weak reader. I just take forever to read anything. And I produce movies. I take forever to read the scripts, which are literally what pay the bills. So, but I would love to know, so how many books have you published?
A little over 50 at this point.
That's incredible. People often tease me. I've directed 17 features. And whenever people say, like, that's a lot of movies, I go, hey, when you can't be good, be prolific. That's always my joke. But if you've never used that, you're welcome to it. But so when you write a book, are you a big outliner, or are you more of just like you just run into it emotionally and just hit that empty page with your fists?
It really depends on the book. I change, I'm not, I'm fully an outliner, or I'm fully make it up as I go along. It depends, it's book by book. So for example, with Pressure and Deathless, I knew where each of the 4 segments began and ended. So it's like, all right, I know where I'm going to take the characters at each segment of the book, but kind of what happened in between there was sort of made up as I went along. There's a book that I'm going to start writing fairly soon called, the working title is The Backyard. That will not be the title of the book. So don't look for The Backyard on the shelves of your local bookstore. They're going to change it. But that one, because it takes place over a really compressed time frame in a real small location, I really kind of needed to know what was going to happen so that I don't just hit the halfway point and say, hey, I'm out of ideas. I needed to prove to myself that I could get a full book out of this premise. So that one is fully outlined.
Okay.
From beginning to end, everything that's going to happen, just because it takes place entirely in a backyard over one night, and I needed to know that there was enough story there, and there is, thankfully.
That sounds like a really fun challenge. Yeah. I would imagine that after 50 books, that's kind of one of the appeals of telling any story is like, that sounds hard. Gimme.
Well, one of my favorites of my own books is called Cutter, and is about a horrible serial killer who finds a Boston Terrier and takes it home and basically becomes a better person in the process because he bonds with this dog. And that was specifically a writing challenge. It was, I'm going to make this the most reprehensible, pathetic guy you can imagine. So he's not Hannibal Lecter. He's not clever. He's not witty. I'm going to give you nothing to latch onto as a reader. And then by the end, you're not rooting for the horrible serial killer, but you're like, oh, I hope maybe things work out a little bit okay, because
you're rooting for the human, right?
So, that was specifically a writing challenge. I'm going to make this the worst human being you can imagine, give you nothing to enjoy about him, and then by the end, make you kind of rooting for him.
And I love that. I love hearing that, because you're my kind of creative, because that's what I thrive on too. I love the idea of doing something you haven't done, or doing something you have done, but in a completely different way. And your goal, of course, is to do it well. That's always the goal. And I meet so many creative people who limit themselves, and it makes me sad. I don't look at somebody who says like, oh, I can't do this, and think like, oh, you aren't good enough. My first thought is like, why are you saying that about yourself? You totally can do something if you want to. Because if you're insanely creative, you're going to do it. And you'll do it with panache. So I love hearing that. I really do. That's awesome. And congratulations on all of your work. It's so amazing. I've written some stuff. I am also not a disciplined writer. That's why I'm a producer director. So my hat's off to you for working so hard and being brave with it, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I try to take chance. One nice thing about being a horror writer is that the genre allows you a really wide range of stuff you can do. So my latest book is Demonic, which is pretty much nonstop action from beginning to end. And the book I'm working on now is more of a psychological thriller. So it is, there's Demonic right there.
Ooh, I like
now is lots of characters talking, hopefully in a very interesting, suspenseful way. So I try to mix up so I don't get sick of it. I'm not ever trying to just write the same book over and over and over.
And for those who are listening only on audio, the cover art, I love it because it's got that retro devil mask right in the middle, that kind of retro plastic mask that kids would wear in like the maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, somewhere in there. I love that style. This year at Halloween, at Spirit Halloween, they had those style of masks where like back, they had mummies and Frankensteins and stuff like that. Love that. That's a great piece of art.
And I got the book. I haven't read it yet because I'm hosting podcasts and writing my own stuff. But the things I have read, Jeff, they've been outstanding. Now, one thing I did read in your bio a little bit is, you are a horror author for sure, but there are other titles that you've written that aren't necessarily horror. And this is a horror podcast, but I want you to talk about those a little bit. You've written some young adult books as well. Is that right?
My young adult books, the first one is basically a horror comedy, very heavily weighted toward the comedy. It's just I tried to make it the funniest book I could write. And then I ended up doing 5 young adult books. 3 of them have no horror at all. And then I have one called The Greatest Zombie Movie Ever, which is about high school kids deciding that they are going to write and direct the greatest zombie movie epic imaginable. And that's just a pure comedy. So those books are, a couple of them are horror adjacent, but they're just comedies. They tried to make them as funny as I possibly could.
Gotcha.
And I did a romantic comedy called Kumquat, which a lot of my horror readers, if they're willing to read it, they love it. Most of them aren't willing to read it. I'm as proud of Kumquat as I am of anything else I've written. I think it's a fun, kind of a touching little road trip love story. And then I did Bang Up, which is my smut comedy. Again, there's some suspense in it. It's mostly, but I just wanted it to be, the funniest book I could possibly write. So,
yeah, I pointed at
a couple times, but
I pointed at Henrique there because sometimes he may be pigeonholed as a horror movie director, producer, but I don't think of it that way. He has more than that. He has comedy as well, and he has a couple of tearjerkers,
all kinds of stuff. Yeah, well, and that's another thing that is part of that challenge. If you're going to write 50 books, if you're going to direct 20 movies, produce whatever, you need to keep yourself interested, or else you're just going to become a cynical hack. And I don't think anyone's goal is to be that.
Yeah, I spend a long time between installments of my series, which is not the right way to do it. I should have done, Wolf Hunt 2, Wolf Hunt 3 back to back. Then they would have, probably sold a lot better. Instead, I do Wolf Hunt 1 in 2010, Wolf Hunt 2 in 2014, and then 2019 for Wolf Hunt 3. So it's not the correct way to do a series.
All right.
There's 5 installments in the Andrew Mayhem series and 20 years between book 1 and book 5. So generally, I try to do something I haven't done before, and I'm always more interested in the original ideas, and then I eventually get dragged back into the series stuff.
Now, from a creative perspective, coming up as a kid, a teenager, what were some of your influences around horror? Be it movies, books, television. What were you brought up on? What drew you to the horror genre, and thus turned you into a horror novelist?
Well, I was a latecomer to the horror genre because I was really squeamish. So I liked, King Kong, the original,
Mhm.
Mighty Joe Young, that kind of stuff, but I couldn't handle any gore. So I wasn't really a horror fan. I was a comedy fan. So
Okay.
it was stuff, I would read, they didn't really generally have laugh out loud funny books for kids, but I liked, the Beverly Cleary stuff and the Encyclopedia Brown series and stuff that was sort of lighthearted and fun, not necessarily laugh out loud funny. And then later I discovered, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. So that kind of stuff. I didn't become a horror fan really until high school when it was, I fell in with a bad crowd. It was kids who, we would get pizza and watch horror movies on weekends. Like
You
the
should have been a
delinquent
good
that
kid
we
and been
were.
out doing drugs and getting in fights.
Yeah, it was, we were the nerds who let's rent 5 movies and get some Domino's pizza. And that's how we're going to spend our weekend. So that's how I sort of got into it, where it was like, well, that's what my friends are doing. And then I became kind of an obsessed horror fan. My horror reading was the most generic route you can imagine. It was, let's, Stephen King, I keep hearing about him. Let's see if his stuff's good. My God, it is. And I read every Stephen King book that had been published to that point. I was like, all right, well, what next? Oh, that Dean Koontz looks interesting. And then I read every Dean Koontz and then Robin McKay. So I started with, the big ones. And then I got into the more obscure stuff, kind of the Richard Laymans and then,
Right.
a lot of the more indie ones. But my entry into horror fiction was the same as almost everyone else's.
Same as mine. Awesome. Were there any horror movies that kind of stuck out when you watch those movies?
The Evil Dead series.
Oh, yeah.
The first one was just, gore, intensity. Watching it now, it's kind of cheesy. Watching it when it first came out, it didn't feel cheesy at all. It was scary as hell. But then Evil Dead 2 changes everything. Evil Dead 2 suddenly becomes this slapstick gore comedy. So it kind of, I'm not sure how influential it was, but it certainly spoke to me. It's certainly kind of in the tone of some of the stuff I write. So, any kind of horror comedies, Shaun of the Dead is my favorite movie of all time. I love Return of the Living Dead, all that kind of stuff. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, not a horror comedy, but it has some of the best dark humor I've ever seen in a horror movie. So that kind of stuff really works for me.
Did you know with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, interesting point. Have you seen part 2 as well? That one's, just out and out ridiculous, funny and gross. Do you know why that movie's so outrageous? It's because Tobe Hooper, the director of both of those, said that when he made the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, from his opinion, it was a comedy. It was a horror comedy. And he thought it was laugh out loud funny. And no one else did on the planet. So and Tobe Hooper, he was a breed of his own. He was that man, he was odd. He liked to smoke cigars and drink spicy tomato juice all day. And, but yeah, so when he made part 2, he was like, all right, I don't want anybody to not laugh at my movie that I want to make them laugh. So he just said, like, no more subtlety. Apparently I'm too good at subtlety.
Well, the original has the funniest line of any movie, which is just, look what your brother did to the door. It's a completely ridiculous idea and then suddenly grounds in reality with no warning.
Yeah.
So you're not given, of course you wouldn't want someone chainsawing up your door, but you're not led to believe that these people care about their own home. And then when you suddenly, add logic with no warning, it's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, and also it rides that line too. It's hilarious and also terrifying because it also makes these bloodthirsty people real.
Right.
Because it's like, oh yeah, we have chicken feathers all over the floor and bone chairs and stuff. That's just our life. But like the door can't have a hole in it. It's gonna get drafty. We're in Texas, but we don't want to freeze while we sleep. Are you stupid? Now get back to eating those teenagers. It's like, ugh. Okay.
That is hilarious. So, Jeff, now we got your background a little bit on the horror movies and things of that sort. When did you release your first book? And what fire lit you to start writing and publishing books?
I've always wanted to be a writer. And so I would kind of change what my focus was. For a long time, I wanted to be a cartoonist. And then I started to want to write comic books. And this is all, early childhood.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Blister when you said that, but go ahead.
Blister was like a fantasy fulfillment. Like that would be my dream job, to be a nationally syndicated newspaper columnist in the 80s. So I got to write a character doing
And
that.
that was a great book, by the way, Henry. You need to check it out. Blister's my favorite so far out of the three that I've read.
I'm opening up my Amazon wish list right now. And I've been paying attention. So
yeah, Blister's amazing. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. So through high school and college, I was still writing fiction, but I was mostly focused on screenplays, which I put aside for a long time once the books took off, and now I'm back into it. But basically, I started writing. I switched to writing novels and did. This was pre self-publishing. Self-publishing existed, but you needed thousands of dollars, and no one did it. But so I had to do the traditional route. You write a book, send it to an agent, they'd reject it, send it to another agent, they'd reject it, send it to an editor, they'd reject it. And I wasn't writing publishable work then. So I did, the old-fashioned way was you would, have your trunk novels. You would write a book. Finally, you would say, okay, this book isn't good enough, and throw it in the trunk. And so I've got, thousands of pages of stuff that I was just practicing learning to write. And they'll never be published because they're not good enough. So my first book to be published was in 2000, and it was an ebook, which now you think, sure, it was an ebook, that's fine. But in 2000, that was a brand new
medium,
scary kind of thing. And it was as small as you could get. So it was almost worse than not being published to a lot of people. It's like, oh, he's given up on a real career. He's just... So I started out with ebooks. I had my first print book around 2002 or 2003. My first big publisher, mass distribution book wasn't until 2009. And that was the mass market edition of Pressure. So I had a really, really slow build in, how long it took to have a quote unquote real book out. And then I got a couple books out of Leisure, who was the publisher, and then they went out of business. And so I sort of switched over to self-publishing, which I love. So I've been doing that for my adult horror fiction, and my young adult stuff is still traditionally published. And my middle grade book, The Backyard, that's why I'm saying they're going to change the title, because that'll go through the marketing department. They'll say, yeah, we're not calling it The Backyard. So that's my stuff for the younger audience is still traditionally published, bookstore distribution type stuff. But for my adult stuff, I love self-publishing. So that's how I do most of that.
Yeah, I love self-publishing too. It's pretty cool.
It's incredible how that market has shifted, and it makes sense when you look at it now. It makes sense. It didn't make sense back in the day. It was like, how could you possibly self-publish? And now it's like, well, putting ink on paper has never been that difficult in this century, right? So it all makes sense. But yeah, no, I'm so happy to see so many authors like the two of you be able to make content, get it out, get it to people who are excited about it. Love it. I love it. And not have anybody sticking their finger in it all day long. Because in film, it's really bad. It's either all your money, or you're just going to be annoyed by every email you get while you're making the movie.
And I was trying to pull up the cover of Blister on my Kindle. I did. That's one I actually read.
Well, I just bought the Audible audiobook, so
okay, awesome.
Yeah, I had an extra credit for this month, so I was like, yoink. I'm very good at listening to audiobooks, so that's a big help. So but yeah, it's got this awesome, at least the audiobook cover has got this awesome
no, it's a great cover. That's why I was trying to pull it up.
Head. It's very visceral. It really grabbed me.
Yeah, I read that at the beach several years ago, and I was like, that's my first book that I read by Jeff Strand. I was like, who is this Jeff Strand guy? I love this book. So there you go.
That's it. Covered by Lynn Hansen.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Love it. And the story's great. and it goes places where I didn't think it would go. So I love that. Love
Yeah,
that.
that was a fun one to just, that book is pretty much all about messing with your expectations.
Well, without giving many spoilers, you want to talk about that book a little bit? What inspired it? Because that is right now, and I haven't read it more than 3, but right now that's my favorite so far.
Yeah, it takes place in the 80s, mostly because the main character, I wanted to write a cartoonist, a successful cartoonist, and that would have been in the 80s when you could be, newspapers all across the country and be kind of a local celebrity because you do a comic strip. And he has a incident, I won't give it away, it's played for laughs.
Right.
And his agent says, you need, maybe you have some anger management issues. Why don't you go off to my cabin in this small town and just chill for a little bit? So he does that, but he gets restless, goes to the local bar and ends up hanging out with these hooligans. We're like, hey, have you heard of Blister? Like, what is, oh, she's the town freak. She lives out in a shed. It's like, yeah, let's go. And so they peek through the window. This deformed face looks back at them. They freak out. They run off. They start laughing. Oh, yeah, that was great. That was great. And then the next morning, sleeping it off, he has remorse. Like, that was a human being, and I just gaped at them. Right. And so he goes back to apologize, and that's where the story.
Oh, no. The worst thing you can have is a conscience in one of those books.
So that is the jumping off point for Blister. Which
and Henrik, it goes in a direction I didn't see coming at all, and that's kudos to you, because I like to try to figure things out as I'm reading. I shouldn't do that, but I like to try to do that.
Not to. Once you've written a few stories all the way through, it's impossible. That part of your brain will never shut off.
Yeah, but surprisingly, in a great way, he kept it fresh, and it took a turn that I didn't expect. So.
Sometimes I like to do books that, just defy expectations at every turn. And then sometimes, Demonic is, hey, you want a fast paced chase thriller with lots of gore and action. That's what you get. It's not about, huge left turns and, oh, that's not at all where I thought this was going. It's a pretty straightforward, but I tried to make it as fun. And
well, let's talk about that a little bit, since that's your latest release. If you want to give the audience a synopsis without spoiling, tell us about Demonic and what can we expect from it?
It is a guy who is falling in love with his married coworker, but he knows, hands off, I'm not going to mess with that. But every once in a while, she'll just have really bad days. And finally, he talks to her, and in a moment of weakness, she admits that her husband is actually a serial killer. And so he thinks, I could solve her problems. I'll take this guy out. And so he takes the day off work, shows up at their house with a gun in his pocket, and then things go horribly, horribly awry. And it's not really a spoiler. The book's called Demonic. There's a devil mask on it. So it's not ruining anything to say that there may be some sort of supernatural element at play. But things go very, very bad. And it's kind of everything that can go wrong does go wrong type book. But once it kicks in, it is essentially a 250-page action sequence.
Cool. Well, tell me, I'm switching gears a little bit. I'm going to go back to the Bram Stoker Award. Tell me how that felt, winning that award. I'd love to win something like that. That sounds amazing to me. So what was your reaction when you found out?
My reaction was pure shock and surprise, because I'm very technical and analytical about these. So I've been nominated 4 times. 3 of the times I don't have a chance in hell. Like, I'm not going to win this one. There's the year I was up against Joe Hill and Peter Straub. It's like, Dweller's not going to win. Then the year I was up for Best Young Adult, I was like, I think I have as good a chance as any of the other 4 books in this category. That gives me a 20% shot. So that's what I'm going to give myself. For this one, for 20th anniversary screening, I was like, I'm 95% sure who's going to win this, and it's not me. So I was pretty confident that I was not going to win. And so I, basically had, prepared myself to not win. I wasn't going to, cry, be heartbroken. It's like, yeah, that's another stamp for my punch card. And kudos to the guy who I'm sure is going to win. So I won. It was just kind of like, whoa, wish I'd planned a
What
speech.
just
So I
happened?
kind of, because you think about, someday when I win a Stoker, I'm going to give, a legendary speech. And I hadn't really prepared anything. I had made a list I thought, what, there's that 5% chance that I win. I'm going to make a list of names just so I don't screw that up.
Right.
Just kind of like this quickly scribbled down list just so I didn't go completely blank. But I didn't have a speech planned otherwise. And so I went up and babbled my way through this inept speech. And I'm told I got a standing ovation, but have no memory of it at all. And then
Was it captured on video anywhere?
It was captured. Yes, the bad speech is captured on video. I don't think they spun the camera around to see the people, but then I just
so we can find that on YouTube maybe somewhere?
They always live stream it. So
okay.
So I think I don't even remember what I said. It wasn't anything great. And then I sat back down and like, whoa, that didn't see that coming.
Let's talk about the winner, the 20th anniversary screening a little bit, because that's right up Henrique's alley. And I did read the small synopsis on it, but you can give us a more, thorough overview without spoiling. But it was around the book centered around a slasher film called The Roofer. Is that right?
Right. It's a fake nonfiction piece.
Okay.
So it's basically, it reads like an in-depth blog entry. So the concept is that it's a blog where they do deep dives into horror movies. And so this time we're going to talk about The Roofer, which is a early 90s slasher film, completely made up. But I tried to make it so that the article does not try to pretend that it's real. So I'm not trying to fool anyone, but I tried to make it as credible as possible. So if you didn't know the context, you might hopefully think you were reading a real article about a slasher film. And so this is at the end of the slasher film. So it's set very specifically when, Friday the 13th was basically over. Nightmare on Elm Street, all the slashers were over and the genre hadn't been revitalized with Scream yet. So this is early 90s, pre-Scream, that time when slash films were basically dead. So that's when this movie came out. And it's a completely unremarkable, not very good movie. But what happened was one guy, for reasons unknown, got fixated on it. And he just kept going back and back and seeing it. And then he came up with the idea that he would recreate the murders on the screen as they were happening. And he completely screws it up. But it's not a death-free attempt. And so that's where all the notoriety of the movie comes from, is this wackadoodle fan killed someone during a screening of The Roofer. That's the movie's pure legacy, is what happened. And then 20 years later, the same theater where that happened decided they're going to do the 20th anniversary screening of The Roofer. And then it's essentially a fake nonfiction piece about what happened then. So it's essentially a pitch black comedy piece about slasher films. So, and people will say, what research did you have to do? What research do you do for your books? Sometimes a lot of research, but when it's a fake nonfiction piece about slasher movies, I've got that covered.
Yeah.
I maybe had to Google a couple of dates, but there's not a lot of research I have to do to write something that sounds like a real article about a fake slasher film, because I'm covered. I've done the research over the past 40 years. So
yeah, that's kind of the same with me. I label myself a small town horror author, and so the things I write about are things I'm familiar with, the places I'm familiar with, the locations, the people. But I did have to stretch my, broaden my horizons a little bit, because I did write one book that the back half was set in Scotland. So I actually had to do research, man. Come on.
Yeah.
But that was fun. But yeah, man, you've had an amazing run so far.
Hopefully I'm just getting started.
50 books in, you probably got another 150 in you.
Yeah. I would like to be one of those authors who does, a book a year, but I'm a full-time writer, and I'm not able to be a full-time writer if I just did one book a year. So I have to be as prolific as I can be while keeping, the quality up. I have to bring my A game every time, but I also, type the end and then start the next book, because that's what it takes to pay all my bills entirely through writing.
Gotcha.
Oh yeah, no, that I get that. That's I pay my bills in film, and yeah, yeah, one movie a year would not cut it even a little bit. Oh,
Well, I do have a few more questions for you. As
Right.
far as the narration goes through Audible, where do you find your narrators? Henrik has been, he hosts a spot every week called Weekly Spooky, and he's narrated several of my short stories, and he blows me away. And I just released my first Audible book where I narrated it, and I listened to it and I cringe because I can hear my Southern twang through the whole thing. But
you have a Southern twang?
yeah, it was
And
people so far have said it's okay, but I want to know how you got started with audiobooks and how you found your narrators.
Really, part of it was just luck. Scott Thomas, I have like 3 major narrators that I work with. Actually 4 at this point, because I've added another one. But so Scott Thomas had done a friend's book and done a really good job. So I basically just went through ACX, which is it feeds from Amazon into Audible, and it ends up just being a royalty split. So I'm not actually hiring someone. It's kind of like a shared agreement where they narrate it and then basically you split the proceeds. So I use Scott Thomas for Pressure, Deathless. I think he also did Dweller. He's done a few of my books. And then Joe Hempel, who's like a legend in the horror audiobook narrating field, has done a bunch of mine. So he's sort of like the default choice for a lot of those. He's actually going to be narrating my novelization of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes that is coming up.
that's awesome.
And then Cassandra Arnold has started to do some of my new ones. She actually did Bang Up, my smut comedy, and then she's done Mandibles and some other stuff. So I've got those are kind of like my 3 default narrators. I've been lucky that it's been a while since I've had to do auditions, which is where you put up a sample of the book. Narrators go through ACX. They say, okay, here are the projects that are available. They record the sample, send it to you. When you find someone you like, you accept it, and then you start the contract process. So really, it came just through ACX mostly. But now that I've got the people I like to work with, I don't have to do the auditions really anymore.
Nice. Cool.
I kind of, I'm a very hands-off narrator. I'm good at live readings, but I wouldn't necessarily want to do my own audiobooks. I'm not good at, alternate voices or any of that kind of stuff. If I do a live reading, you can mess up, you can do all that. No one cares because it's just a moment. Whereas with an audiobook, you have to be a lot more precise. I think I would just be screwing up over and over and over.
Oh, I did on my first one. I did.
It's the rewind button.
Exactly. It's a rewind, delete, cut chunks out, replace.
So I leave that to the professionals. All right, Joe Hempel, do your best and I'll trust you. So
that's actually, as a narrator, that's one of the reasons I have not done a ton of books that are not books I myself are publishing, because some people are so micromanagey, and it's really hard when it's like, look, my friend, I'm already reading a 6-hour or 10-hour book out loud for you and fitting that into my life and doing all this stuff on top of everything else I do. And then you tell me you just aren't sure why, but you don't like an entire chapter. So I pretty much narrate the things that I'm the boss on exclusively, because
ACX has some protection there where you're only allowed to ask for 2 rounds of changes. So you can't just keep micromanaging over and over and over. But yeah, I can see why that would be pretty frustrating. I'm pretty much just like, good job.
That's how I would be if I was hiring other narrators. That's how I would be. I would be like, just do the best you can, because clearly you're good at it, because that's why I'm bringing you on.
Yeah, Henrik is amazing, by the way. If you ever want to give him a tryout, he can. Really, he just said he's his own boss, so he probably doesn't want to. But anyway, he does the voices, he does everything. So go listen to Weekly Spooky. You'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, he's fantastic. Now, another thing that caught my interest, speaking of film, is I think I read somewhere you may have some of these books being adapted for film. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff, and it's a slow, maddening process where it just, it can drag out for years and years. And so I've got stuff, some of it's kind of spinning its wheels, some of it seems like it could be really cool. One that I was working on, it got me my Writers Guild of America membership. It was a full, big studio thing where I wrote the screenplay for the feature film, and then it ended up having issues where they couldn't work out the budget, and now it has changed into a TV show, which I'll also be writing if that ends up going forward. So it was a very much worth doing, but as of yet, no cameras have turned on. But then I've got lots of other stuff where I'm not actually involved. I just kind of every few months, hey, what's going on? Can I have like a little nugget of information? And it's that's one of the nice things about books, especially self-published books, is I write the book. When I'm happy with the book, when the book is done, I publish it, as opposed to the movie stuff, which is just, one, out of my control, and two, moves more slowly than you can imagine. And so I had heard, when you see a bad movie, don't say, how did this get made? You should praise the miracle that it got made at all. And then I realized, from my own experience, that is absolutely true. It is just unreal how hard it is to get a movie made.
Yeah, you got Henry shaking his head. So,
oh no, I'm nodding. I'm like, oh
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, up and down in agreement.
Yeah, well, a great poet once said, "Mo money, mo problems," and that is how the film business works. The more money at stake, the more problems will arise. So, the best projects I've worked on, as far as just getting them done and not being frustrated, were just as cheap as humanly possible. And ideally, and not a lot of filmmakers would say this, ideally the money's all coming out of my own pocket. As unfun as that can be for many reasons, when the money comes out of my own pocket, I'm the only person who has to make a decision at the end of the day. And that's nice, because then there actually will be a movie and not just forever meetings and forever emails, which I got pretty sick of that after about 6 or 7 years of this.
Yeah, there was a feature film made out of one of my books called Mindy Has to Die, but they essentially filmed most of it and then had to stop production, and then they lost their lead actor. So the movie they sort of edited around it, but the movie is sort of complete. It played in a couple film festivals. I don't know if it's ever going to get released, because it just kind of ends. It's one of the things that I loved it. I was, for the first half, I was like, oh, I am so happy with this. And then it starts to fall apart because of the production difficulties. I don't know that it's ever going to get released. And if it does get released, there'll be lots of 1-star, what the hell kind of ending was that? Because they did the best they could, but it was supposed to have another like 20 minutes to it. So I don't know that you will ever be able to see it, but.
Well, if those people ever decide they're not going to do anything with it, you should give me an email, and maybe we can salvage it. That's something I've done many times, is salvage movies that were insalvageable. I don't know how I would do it, because I've not seen the movie or anything, but I'm just going to throw that out there, because I turned around a kids movie that was only 63 minutes, and we were able to get it to feature length and released by Vision Films, and Vision Films had told us when they saw the 63-minute version that we were screwed. And then I showed them the 76-minute version, and they were like, we'll take it. And I was like, man, that's funny how quickly it turns. So I'm just going to throw that out there. If your filmmaker friends that made it, the folks who are behind it, are going to take a loss on it, maybe I can buy the junker from you.
Yeah, I'll find. Yeah, what happened? Well, the first draft of it actually ended with, like, halfway through the movie, it switches to the lead actor reading my book, so that you know what happened, because they had already got it into a film festival and needed a completed project. So the lead actor sits down with a copy of the book and reads for the next half of the movie what happened. I was like, is that really what you're going to release? No, we needed that version. So they got some extra footage, but not enough. And so it's kind of just, it has an ending, but an extremely unsatisfying ending.
So it's frustrating for the audience, because it's great for the first half, and then you see it start to fall apart a little bit, and then it just falls off the cliff. Is that basically
what will happen? Is it cuts to black, the credits start rolling. Whoa, what? You'll hear this loud. I haven't been in an audience where it played, but I'm assuming cut to black, loud, annoyed groan, and then people muttering angrily as they walk out. So it's basically I'm really happy with what is on the screen, but it's an incomplete film. So
Yeah, I got you.
What the plans are, but I will follow up.
Well, I'd love to see.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, just a thought, because whenever I there's nothing that makes me sadder than the idea that a movie might be orphaned, because I think there's always potential in every project.
Yep.
I was going to say I'd love to see Blister on screen. That would make a good screen adaptation, I would think.
I would think so too. That weirdly, a lot of my books have had movie interest. Blister really hasn't.
Wow, really?
And I think it's
unique. I mean, it's not like anything that's out there. I haven't seen a movie like that.
I would have thought, for example, I would have thought Ferocious would have lots of people, and it really hasn't.
Yeah.
Whereas, my kids' book, I have a bad feeling about this. I get stuff like all the time asking about the movie rights to that, and Wolf Hunt. Wolf Hunt has been in development with a major studio for like 5 years, and I get requests for that on a semi-regular basis. So it kind of I'm not sure what causes certain projects to have lots of queries and some to have none, but.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not an expert in that field. I'd have to defer to Henrique, but he just said the same thing. Your guess is as good as his.
I mean, the show business is like all other businesses where you put stories out to people to purchase, which is there's somebody who thinks they know, and they might not know, but they think they know what'll work, but they may not actually know. So that's kind of how it goes.
Well, you've mentioned Wolf Hunt several times. I don't want to jump around too much on the podcast, but now you piqued my interest with that. What is that series about? So the audience knows in case they want to. Now it seems like it's all out there, right? You're not releasing any more of those. So
right.
Kind of give us a synopsis on that.
Yeah, it's basically, it is two thugs for hire, George and Lou, who are hired to transport this guy in a cage. And the gangsters who deliver the guy to them say, you're taking him across Florida. Do not let him out of the cage. He's a werewolf. He's going to try to trick you. I don't care if you believe us or not. It doesn't matter if you believe us. Don't let him out of the cage. And he gets out of the cage and he is in fact a werewolf. And the twist is that he can change at will, and he can change instantly. And he can change parts of himself. So he gets out of the cage basically by luring them close enough to the cage. They're out of arm's reach of a human arm, but they're not out of arm's reach of a wolf arm. So he changes, which gets him those extra few inches to grab the guy's throat and get the cage open. So it's basically just like that. It's pretty much nonstop action, and it's a chase trying to get the werewolf back.
Over a series of books.
No, it's a complete adventure in the first one, and then it leads into, well, you took care of this werewolf problem. This time it's a little girl.
I got you.
And she can't control herself. We need you to do this. And then the third one is more the revenge thing. And by the third book, I feel like I might do another George and Lou adventure because people really love those characters. I don't know that I do another werewolf book. I don't think I'll do Wolf Hunt 4, but I may do another George
centering around those two. Gotcha.
So yes, the second one, it doesn't land on a huge cliffhanger, but it ends unresolved, and then it continues directly into Wolf Hunt 3, which has a fairly, not a definitive ending, but it's a satisfying. Like if there's never a Wolf Hunt 4, that's a perfectly good place for the series to end.
Cool. All right. Well, I noticed one other thing that's similar, and between us is you have a wife and a huge cat. I have a wife and a huge cat.
Yes, the cat is gigantic. He is a very photogenic, but he's a great big lazy blob. So
well, my cat is 20 pounds. Higher or lower?
Higher. Chaos.
Oh, wow.
I don't know anyone who has a cat who weighs as much as Chaos. And I don't know what his deal is, because
you don't have a Maine Coon on your hands, do you?
Gorge himself with unlimited food. He's on food, portion control, but he keeps blobbing out. So
I was saying you don't have a Maine Coon, do you?
No,
Those
people
are
say, "Oh, obviously he's a Maine Coon." It's like he's not a Maine Coon. He's a regular tabby cat who is just enormous. If he was
wow.
in the office, I would spin the camera around and let you see him.
Oh yeah. Well, mine's in my wife's office right now. I have the beagle back here. He's asleep in the chair. But
I like hearing that because I'm like, that's so cute. I have a 70-pound dog on my foot right now.
You say 70 or 17?
70.
Oh, wow.
I have a big old girl. She has been snoring this whole time, laying on my foot. I want to ask you a real quick question. You said you were doing the novelization of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Right.
That is so awesome. Novelizations seem to be really kind of snapping back lately.
Yeah, there was actually an article that went out a couple of days ago about the rise, fall, and return of novelizations. And this one came. If you order directly from Encyclopocalypse Books, they've already shipped them. I've got a big stack of them out of camera range. But yeah. Then I basically the book comes out April 14th, and I had basically done a tweet saying I've got a copy to. It comes in the regular trade paperback, but also a vintage looking.
oh, I like that.
Mass market.
I love that vintage look. Yeah,
I do too.
great.
And it's got the old fashioned stills from the movie.
Ah, nice.
All that stuff.
I'm gonna get that.
Looked like a book you would have got in 1978. But yeah, I had noticed that I did a tweet sort of just joking around saying, how is it possible that I've not been hired to write an Attack of the Killer Tomatoes novelization? And I wasn't really intending to have someone reach out to me. I just was trying to be amusing and have people say, "Oh, yeah, that'd be great." But Encyclopocalypse Books reached out and said, if you're serious, we'll see what we can do. And I said, yeah. And then they reached out to the filmmakers, and a few weeks later, I was in a Zoom meeting, basically giving my pitch. And of course, they're not getting an onslaught of, can we write a novelization for your 1978, movie? But I basically said, I'm going to treat it like you had a Marvel movies budget. And so I wasn't interested in just recycling jokes, because if you've seen the movie, you've seen the jokes. So I it follows the movie scene by scene until it doesn't, but it follows the movie scene by scene through most of the movie, and then just all new jokes and a lot of, I expanded stuff, took stuff further, kept it, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. It's not a serious dramatic work. It is, a really, really goofy Attack. If you like the movie, I tried to keep that tone of, just pure, shameless silliness. But I only use their jokes if I catapulted on to something else. So, the legendary, please pass the ketchup joke, that's in there, but it leads to something that goes longer and darker. But
I love that.
Yeah, I'm intrigued now. I definitely want to pick that up for sure.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write, because the movie's really meta, so the book is mega meta, and it was fun to just pretty much just go berserk and have as much fun and be as silly as I possibly could, and be respectful of the movies, but also have fun with the idea that a lot of the movies, not a lot, but parts of the movies haven't aged particularly well. So I kind of lean into those elements and have fun with that. So it was
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's so cool.
So yeah, that comes. I'm not sure when this podcast goes live or when people are watching it, but if you're watching this on or after April 15th or 14th, 2023, the book is available from the retailer of your choice.
Well, this podcast is actually going to go live this Monday, the 13th.
If you're watching it, if you're a loyal fan watching it, as soon as it goes up, you have to wait a little bit. But
Yep.
if you're a slacker, it may be available.
Good things come to those who wait.
Awesome. Well, I have really only have one other question for you, and it may turn into a lengthy question. I don't know, or a lengthy answer. Not sure. But I go to a few conventions a year. One staple I have is Days of the Dead in Atlanta, and I get a lot of new readers there, sell a lot of books there. I want to know what your convention experiences are like. Do you get a lot of readers from those? Do you get to talk to a lot of people? I just like to know your
We
take
have
on it.
probably crossed paths at Days of the Dead Atlanta. So I've been to that one a couple of times. I have a lot of conventions that have become regulars. When I lived in Florida, I wasn't going to as many. Now that I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I can drive to a lot of these. So I've added a bunch more conventions. So the ones that I never miss are StokerCon. I go to that every year.
Mm-hmm.
I go to KillerCon, which is in Austin. I go to Scares the Care, which is in Virginia, and I go to Nikon, which is was in Rhode Island. I think now it's in Massachusetts. And so those are generally horror literature focused. I tend to focus more on the ones that are really book focused.
Yeah.
Those are the 4 that I would never miss. This year I'm also going to MoCon, which is Maurice Broaddus's personal convention. I'm going to go to Con Carolinas, which is sort
Is that the one in May?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be there. I'm not there as a vendor, but I'll be there because I want to talk to Barbara Crampton. I'm trying to get her on this show.
Yeah, I'm going to be a guest at that one. And then I'm going to do Horror on Main, which is up in Maryland. And that's sort of a book-focused, book and movie-focused one. And then probably more stuff as the year goes on. But yeah, I love conventions. And the year that COVID made me not go to conventions was just a long and miserable year. So, I'm making up for that lost year by going to as many as I can.
Right. No, I agree with you. Yeah. The COVID, when it hit, I'd gone to the Days of the Dead convention in February in Atlanta. And after that, everything shut down.
Yeah.
So they got that one in and then it was done. But
yeah, so I, do as many conventions as I can. And of course, they're not free, but
right.
So there's, a limit to the number that you can attend, but I love going to them. Sometimes I have like at Scares the Care, I'll be there selling, copies of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. But a lot of times I just like to, do readings or panels and stuff, but I'm not as big of a fan of sitting behind the table and selling books. But it varies from convention to convention. But yes, I go to a lot of them. I highly recommend them. If you're a writer who's trying to, get your name out there, they're a good way. Not necessarily from the number of books you'll sell, but from the people you'll meet.
Exactly.
Just having, making new friends, making connections. They are very, very valuable. So I'm a hardcore believer in going to horror conventions.
Agreed. Well, Henrique, do you have any follow-up or last questions for
Honestly, I just want to say sincere congratulations, because I know how hard it is when you're doing the work all the time. You never really get to take a second and, do a little patting yourself on the. Seriously, congratulations on an incredible output of really interesting work, and more importantly, work that you have remained interested in, because that is the most important part. So I want to say congratulations. I was not lying. I loaded Blister into my Audible app. It's in there. I will be listening to it. And if the worst case, I'll be listening to it on my way to Cleveland to a convention at the end of this month. So
you will enjoy it, Henrique.
I'm really looking forward to it. I'll drop you an email and let you know how I enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you.
And Jeff, I want to take this time for you to promote anything you want to promote, and I'm going to put all the links in the below, so everyone will be able to click and find you. But anything you want to promote, tell the folks what you have, where they can find you. This is your time. Take as much time as you need.
Pretty easy to find. If you plug in Jeff Strand on Amazon, it'll pop up pretty much everything. I'm jeffstrand.com is my website. I'm on Twitter as @JeffStrand. So those are the 3 main places you can find me.
Awesome. And Henrique, I want to afford you the same luxury. Tell our folks where we can find you and your incredible work.
Well, definitely check out my official website, which I laugh because this is always a big one. Incrediblyhandsome.com is where all the information is about my films, television, and podcasts. And of course, You can listen to Weekly Spooky. It's a podcast where there's a new narrated short story every single Wednesday. And in July, we'll be hitting our 200th episode. So we're getting ready for a big one.
Amazing. And Henrique has narrated, well, I don't know, 8 or 9 of my short stories now on Weekly Spooky.
Oh, yeah.
And he is amazing. So we appreciate Henrique. And I am Charles Campbell. I'm your small town horror author. You can find me at valleyboypublications.com. It has links to all my social media stuff. So you can find me on Instagram. And we do have a Horror 421, the podcast Facebook page. So you can find us there. If anyone, any creative folks are listening to us in the horror world, just shoot me an email or an instant message on Facebook. If you want to be on the show, we'll definitely line you up and get you on as a guest. I want to thank Henrique again for co-hosting with me today, so I appreciate it. And I want to thank you again, Jeff. You're amazing, and I'm so happy that you were able to be on the podcast today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, guys, we appreciate it, and thank you for listening to Horror 421, the podcast. See you next time.
We hope you had a horrific time, lovelies. Thank you for tuning in to Horror 421, the podcast. Be sure to like us on YouTube and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.